His solution to this apparently literal problem is, well, the same solution that the post-Anselmian Immaculate Conception tradition in England came up with, which was if you start purifying the physical lineage of seed from Abraham or from Adam all the way through the direct line to Mary, you may gradually get a seed that is no longer producing in passion, and therefore the coitus is without venial sin, without passion, without lust, and therefore Mary would have been conceived without lust. It's the exact same point being made in the birthday homily attributed to John the Damascene. So, in one sense, his solution does coincide with an earlier Byzantine solution. The thing that's clear is Palamas is not quoting that sermon. He doesn't even seem to know it for this solution. So where does he know this from? Well, the entire context of his sermon suggests that the idea was not his own original invention. He wasn't an innovator. He didn't say, gee whiz, how am I going to solve this problem? I'll come up with a new invention. It's called the purification of Mary's familial line. And that's very untheological to do, to just invent a reason, not have a scriptural basis or a patristic basis. Instead, what we're probably looking at is Palamas knows of a tradition in some Greek writings. He may not know who the authors are, but all these Greek writings coincide with the Latin position, which has this idea. And what is the problem that they're dealing with again? They're dealing with the active conception of Anna problem, not the Duns Scotus solution, but the active conception of Anna problem. Whether we take it as a metaphor or we take it literally, Anna conceived in coitus. If her coitus was impure, then a stain would result. The stain is identified with original sin. That stain infects the soul, according to Augustine's opinion. If we can just get rid of that stain, then the soul will never be infected. Palamas is giving an Augustinian, he's giving an Augustinian objector, a hypothetical Augustinian objector, a solution for an Augustinian problem. And so I was hesitant, though somewhat open to Palamas being ambivalent on original sin several years ago when I published in the Oxford Handbook of Mary, Palamas's theory. But it's quite clear to me now that the theory in every way reflects all the themes, the context, and the sources that would have been used for homilies in the Immaculate Conception tradition in the West. So what we have here is the only two known solutions in the Byzantine East from a seed point of view, Damascene and Palamas, both coincide perfectly with the solutions in England after Anselm, but only Palamas's follows the exact idea that you can take the entire lineage of people for generations and gradually purify them and then get a holistic sperm.
Incredible points there. Elijah, your thoughts on that, because I remember last night when it was very late at night when I was doing a little bit of reading before bed. I messaged Elijah and we talked a little bit in the morning. I think this is a pretty incredible piece of text. And just Elijah, I'd like to give you a chance to give your thoughts or engage with Father on this particular point.
Yeah, appreciate that, William. Father, you mentioned Gregory Palamas' idea of original sin. Are you aware? I'm sure you are aware of this quote, but if you don't mind, I can just read it real quick. He says, in pertaining to original sin, he says, as the separation of the soul from. Now, I think I already read this. Yeah, I did already read this. I thought I only read the Saint Simeon.
For some reason, I thought that you said that was Gregory Nazianzen. That was the Gregory Palamas, huh?
Yeah, so both. I read both, and they sound very similar, which is why I brought up Saint Gregory. Saint Simeon and the New Theologian, is because it almost sounds like he's getting it from him. and that's why I asked if he was an Eastern father. It almost sounds like he's reading, because it's almost verbatim, right? What he's quoting as to what it means to have a death of the soul. It's a separation of God from the soul. So to that point, we get to the version. What he says is very interesting on the thing that I was reading, because right after that whole ordeal, literally the next line, he says that God preordained this ever Virgin Mary, this ever Virgin Maid, whom we extol today. Preordained. Is that the same idea of this whole thing that you're talking about, of this ancestral lineage being purified little by little? Is
Well,
that
he's even
his?
clearer. Yeah, he's even clearer in homily 57, as in the paper. But the actual phrase is something like "O Theos proorisi," the God predestines. Is actually a citation, I think, from Ephesians or something. So it's talking about predestination as in Ephesians. He wants us to understand that the same kind of predestination is going on there, and that is before time. And that means that when she was forechosen in God's mind, there was yet no creation. There was nothing outside there. It was mentally, God is putting together his plan for creation from eternity. And mentally, he's choosing out Mary as special. And in fact, if you look at the way that I outline things in my paper, I show you that theme for theme, this idea of the lineage of Mary even being specially chosen for prophetic and grace-filled offices, and they get holier and holier as they get closer to Mary. That's already all in the Latin literature in the sermons. So Palamas is entirely parallel with this idea. Once again, these ideas were thought to be unique to him, with authors like Dvornik and Gigi in Byzantine literature, but not unique to him in Christian literature, because 100 years before this, these were regular themes in Latin sermonizing. The point here, again, being Gregory is probably in possession of some translations, whether they are anonymous, whether they are liturgical texts, which he is using. In fact, I was very puzzled, because if you look at these Greek sermons, many of them on the Mariological topics, and especially he has one that he loves to repeat about a half a dozen times, where he contrasts the new man to the old man in his homilies. I cannot find that in Byzantine literature or liturgy. Where I can find that is in Latin fathers. So it's not to say that Gregory is intentionally trying to be Latin-minded or intentionally trying to use Latin literature, but he's got a problem, and he does have a piece of literature probably that solves that problem. That piece of literature is something that was probably translated from a Latin liturgical context. So the final result then is that probably the introduction of good solutions to the problem of the Immaculate Conception, brought over by the Dominicans into the Byzantine East and by Lombard sentences into the Byzantine East, because that was translated into Greek, were solved by also going to Latin solutions. And one of those was probably, for Palamas, the active conception of Anna sermons, whereas later Palamites will prefer Duns Scotus solutions.
Very good point, Father. And now, what homily is this? Is on the entry of Mother of God into the Holy of Holies 2.
Yeah, that would be 53, I believe.
53, and I'm sure you're aware of this. To your point that you're making here, it says that she was a gift from God and to God even before she was born. How could she be otherwise, that she was preordained before all ages as the dwelling place of the Maker of all the worlds? And then he says, talks about, Anna's, being Anna and Joachim being, how spotless their hearts must have been to be able to offer up a prayer so far-reaching, and effective. And then he says, she was brought like a most holy shoot, sprung from a holy root, a shoot reaching from earth to heaven. that sounds to me to be very John Damascenean, I guess, right? Like this whole
Yeah, this is once again talking about the purification of her root. So it's once again underlining the fact that the seed and the flesh out of which she came was, in the context of his Marian sermons, is without passion.
exactly. That's what it
That's
sounds
the
like.
metaphor. Now, if Palamas doesn't mean that literally, I could perfectly live with that. But that's the metaphor he's gotten in the Greek church, and that's the metaphor that Augustine gave him.
Right. Yeah.
Because the root is one of Augustine's metaphors too for talking about original sin. And so he sticks with the metaphor. He's not giving us an analysis of, well, the metaphor actually stands for the abstract notion of original justice. For Palamas, original justice would be an energy of the spirit. The energy of the spirit moves the soul. The soul is the moved. The spirit is the mover. It moves by means of the energy. He doesn't give us any of that because these are public sermons that are either given to simple monks or to the faithful. The style for some of these sermons is quite straightforward. It's not very complicated. So the assumption here is that in many of the sermons, and I can't remember, I think the entrance has a very simple style. It suggests that the audience is not very complicated. So this is supposed to be understood by them. But once again, this idea of predestination and then bringing the root in there, this is all what we would typically expect from Western Immaculate Conception sermons.
Yes, that's what it sounds like to me. And then, this whole idea of nature, pure nature versus our nature, human nature is defiled. He says, and this is from I believe it was on the entry of the Mother of God into the Holy of Holies, homily 1. He says, precise justice demanded that the same human nature which had been willingly enslaved and defeated must fight to win back victory and rid itself to voluntary servitude. For that reason, it was God's good pleasure to assume our nature from us, uniting it mysteriously with his person. His sublime purity beyond our understanding could not, however, become one with defiled human nature. So he says, God cannot mix himself with defiled human nature. Then he says, only this is impossible for God, to be joined in union with something impure before it had been cleansed. A completely undefiled and most pure virgin was needed to carry in her womb and give birth to the lover and giver of purity. This virgin was marked out beforehand, brought to perfection, and revealed in the mystery, blah, blah, blah. So my question here is this a problem that he's trying to solve as to how Christ can assume our nature without being defiled? Is he saying that Anna and Joachim had passionless, I guess, sex, and now Mary is pure, so she doesn't have that defilement, and that's how Christ can dwell in her? Is that what he's trying to solve? Is that why he's talking about this?
Yeah, but I think there's another point there. I'd have to look at the Greek to make sure that this is true. But the background sounds very much like the homily 1 of St. Proclus of Constantinople, which is basically saying you need someone who can satisfy the demands of divine justice. And that has to be a perfect being that has to be able to pay to God what is owed, the debt that is owed. And that debt is so grave and large that you needed someone extraordinary to pay it.
He does talk about that a little bit. He does say that the only way we could be saved is if God himself came down and took on our nature and saved us.
And who in the West is most associated with that idea?
I'd say Augustine, right?
St. Anselm.
Oh, that's right. Okay, that makes sense.
Basically, the satisfaction theory of Anselm, which is so criticized by some rather uninformed people, they don't realize that Proclus of Constantinople is responsible for this in his homily 1 for the satisfaction theory, and that the satisfaction theory was translated into Latin. And among the readers of the Latin translation of the satisfaction theory was St. Anselmo.
And you find this in the Syriac Fathers very explicitly as well, the satisfaction theory, how we have a debt.
So you've got essentially Palamas probably, that's a very famous homily. So it would not be surprising to me if Palamas had access to that. But what you essentially have there is him providing a Marian background to the satisfaction theory. He's including Mariology in the satisfaction theory.
That makes sense. Thank you for your thoughts, Father. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Now, one that I would like to read aloud, and I believe I think I'm correct. I believe people can find it in this book here. It's Palamas as well, but we hear one of the things that does get brought up is what is occurring at the Annunciation. We hear it brought up all the time. Elijah and myself, when we're dialoguing with various people, we hear it brought up often. Palamas does say something very interesting. It is in the mystery of the Incarnation. And he says, "Holy you are, truly, O Virgin. The angel says, you are full of grace in every possible way. The Holy Spirit will overshadow you and will make you even holier, preparing you for the gift of God." This is a theme we find very often. You've done, in my opinion, the best work on this particular issue, where you clearly show how that purification, or the prokathartisa at the Annunciation, is very clearly an increase in graces. You find this theme very clear. This is laid out, in my opinion. This is very clear here in Palamas. It's not a matter of a necessity to cleanse from sin here at the Annunciation. Rather, to me, it seems really clear. I mean, it's right there. He'll make you even holier. Am I reading him correctly?
That's actually a nice find. I've never really drawn attention to that, but if the term there, I'd have to look at the Greek. If it's something like hagiotera or something like that, it reminds me of Saint Sophronius of Jerusalem, which is another famous sermon. His Annunciation sermon. He says the Holy Spirit will come upon you to make what is holy even more holy, or holier. And then he goes through a list of things, including her being purified. So this idea that Gregory Nazianzen's purification at the Annunciation means to take a pure nature and to elevate it even higher by means of grace is something that Sophronius defined. It was a defining interpretation by Sophronius of Jerusalem, the spiritual father of Maximus the Confessor. And to me, this smacks of Palamas having read Saint Sophronius's Annunciation homily.
That is a really good point. I had not thought of that, but you're right. Sophronius does use very similar language, and I think it would be very much in line with the way you find fathers utilizing the particular language, and then clearly another figure. One day we can do, God willing, hopefully do a whole show on him. Another important figure, without a doubt, of course, is Nicholas Kabbasalas, which Elijah and myself have talked about him as well. But you find this theme very often. You find it in these very important figures, and I think just to bring it to light even more so, I want to emphasize again, if you're barely tuning in, down here below is the article that Father Kappes presented at Oxford on Holy Mary from St. Gregory of Palamas, as well as a link to his academia page, where he's got a ton of really, really good stuff that he's putting out there. But yeah, any other thoughts, Father? I'd like to see if you have any other thoughts before we wrap up. Any thoughts you've got? Any thoughts?
Well, one thing that I have not yet explored, I'll explore it more when the article comes out. I was struck by is the feast of the entrance of Mary into the temple is only recently a feast that was introduced into the Latin Church. It's known that the feast came from Cyprus. Mm-hmm. It's known that Philip Mézières was responsible for it, a very ecumenical, pro-Greek Latin fella that was in Cyprus. He tried to form his own crusading order, which kind of fell flat on its face. It had some success, but a very interesting point is the fact that it was Philip Mézières' enthusiasm for the entrance of Mary the Theotokos, which was singularly responsible for the Avignon popes adopting it around, I want to say 1373, 1378. But I have not proven this, but I am suspicious, and we'll find out what my research leads me to, Philip Mézières had a relationship with a fellow by the name of Peter Thomé, who was a very important, let's call him ambassador to Constantinople. And who were the only people in this period that we have any evidence of giving public entrance sermons that were kind of famous and copied from? Gregory Palamas and Nicephorus Gregoras, who was an anti-Latin. At the time that Philip Mézière's friend was in Constantinople, it was Gregory Palamas who was in the ascendancy and who was publicly speaking and involved in all kinds of public theological debates. It is potentially the case that Philip Mézières had brought to his attention the Greek Church's reverence and theology of the entrance, in addition to the local Cyprus celebrations in the churches, because of Gregory Palamas's homily. So it is, if not directly, at least circumstantially possible that Gregory Palamas was somehow an instrument for the establishment of the Feast of the Entrance in the Avignon in the late 14th century. And then thereafter it spread to the entire Latin Church, such that the Vatican II Missal that all of us use and the pre-Vatican II Missals have the Feast of the Entrance of the Theotokos, potentially because of the glory that was rendered to the feast by Gregory Palamas.
That is incredible. Yeah, that really is incredible. Another thing that I'll just briefly read it is to me, everything that I really look at when we look at Palamas, I think he's very clear in his Mariology is fantastic. One other thing that we note is in Palamas when he talks about the toddler Mary in the temple, as you're very well aware of this particular area, where already as a little girl he notices. Indeed, it's a unique Greek word. I was never aware of that Greek word before, where he says the little girl possesses the almost godlike grace. He says, above all men, it was necessary that she enjoy greater things than the others, and she dwell within the Holy of Holies, and that men be persuaded by such a happening to love so great marvels. And as you go downward, it says, by means of which she better strengthened her constitution, she was both preserved and fulfilled as far as her body, which was purer and higher than the bodiless creatures, for she was accustomed to the heavenly ministers of a spring. She was not once only in the habit of entering into the Holy of Holies, but used to dwell there familiarly. This is his homily 52, which you're probably very well aware of. So the Mariology of St. Gregory of Palamas, in my opinion, is not an ambiguous one. I think it's very clear what we can get from his language. I used to be very clear that I thought Palamas was very clear in the sense of an all holy, immaculate creation for Holy Mary, if you will. But I think, would you say that, because Elijah and myself, we deal with a lot in apologetics, would it be straining credulity, or would you say that it's possible to also say that St. Gregory of Palamas believed in an immaculate conception when it comes to Holy Mary?
Yeah, I've shifted because of the evidence my opinion that we can place with many of the other Palamites who quite clearly, they don't always have the same reasons for affirming it or the same arguments, but all the other Palamites affirm the Immaculate Conception that mention this issue. I mean, Mark of Ephesus never dealt with the conception aspects, but you of course know that Gennadius Scholarius, who is locally a saint, you know that Joseph Brienius, a celebrated anti-Latin, Emperor Manuel II, Paleologus, trying to think who else is explicitly addressed, St. Nicholas Cavas, who for very peculiar reasons holds her to be the Immaculate Conception, but does deal with the pre-purified very, very much in a Latin way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we should class Palamas now because of his Augustinian preoccupations, his purification of the lineage of Mary, and it's clear. It clearly fits perfectly within the greater liturgical sermon or sermon chinal context of the Middle Ages. Is that yeah, I would say he's an immaculist of the old school, not of the new school. He's an immaculist of the active conception of Anna. He's not a immaculatist in the Duns Scotus tradition.